For more on the COP26 Climate Pact reach in Glasgow, we're now joined via Zoom by environmentalist from the African Climate Alliance, Xoli Fuyani. Xoli, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Globe.
Thank you for having me.
And having studied the pact, Xoli, just how realistic is the pact? I mean, to achieve before the next conference?
Sorry, I missed your words. Can you just repeat the question again?
Just how realistic is the pact?
I mean, just listening to the clips, like we have heard that a lot of people are disappointed by the outcomes of COP. I mean, we often hear that like we have 10 years, or there is going to be an emergency. But if you're living like in a country like South Africa, which there's a lot of inequalities, in fact, the whole of the global south, where there's a lot of communities who are already like feeling the impacts of climate change. I mean, if we look at Kenya, there are actually more than 2 million people who are currently experiencing hunger because of climate effects. And so, so a lot of people are disappointed, and actually we are very much in concern about like what's going to come next.
Yeah. You know, Xoli, in as much as the United Nations has called this pact an important step and a compromise at the same time, but some activists dismissed it as a betrayal of the planet and the people. How would you view this pact? Where do you stand?
I mean, I totally stand with the activist because, I mean, as a person also like who works mostly in marginalized communities, I mean, I have kids in my program that travel more than 2 kilometers to get access to clean water and sanitation. I mean, there's currently probably now at this moment a child in Emalahleni who's struggling to breathe, because of the coal mines. And yet we are seeing the denial from our government and really wanting to fund the coal, which is the biggest impact in the climate change. So basically the civil society is saying like our government need to take this seriously and let this be an emergency, because we've seen, with COVID, how we can come together and mobilize and pull together our resources and funding when there's an emergency. And I think one of the things that was the biggest highlight from this COP was that like we also need to stop. We need to stop looking at the climate as an isolating issue, because we can't be talking about climate change without really looking at our social justice, because human beings are currently being affected.
The pact kept alive the hope of, capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Are you at all satisfied?
Again, not at all. I mean, currently in South Africa, we are proposing a new 1,500 kilowatt coal-powered electricity. And I mean, I know that we might not be the biggest emitters in the world, but we are currently number 2 in Africa. And we have seen how the coal mining industry is really devastating communities and affecting lives, especially like in Mpumalanga, where, as I've said before, like we have children experiencing asthma and parents actually having to leave their jobs to look after those kids. So we again, like calling to our leaders to be really ambitious and to really stop investing in fossil fuels.
I mean, this pact was adopted despite a last-minute intervention by India to sort of water down the language on phasing out coal to merely phasing it down. I mean, why the obsession with coal? Why isn't it done away with completely?
Coal, I mean, there's 2 parts. When coal is a biggest industry in the whole world. I mean, if you look at their profit margins, it's a big money-making scheme. So also there has been like a political view where we're having like big companies like Shell, Sasol, who are benefiting from the coal mining industry. And yet, I mean, there's been innovation and solution that says like, please, let's look at renewable energy. And also, I know that there's been a lot of research into looking how that could also be a cost-effective and really benefit our economy. But I think because we haven't really done a lot of stats and studies towards like what like the actual numbers could be and how our countries could benefit. So our government is still clinging and longing, to the profit margins of the coal industry. That's why it's such a big thing, and also like such a struggle, for our leaders to let it go, because they see it as a part of development, a part of way of really bringing us up to the map because of the money that it's making to the country, but also not looking at the effects and how it's affecting really like marginalized communities and how it's just killing actually a lot of people.
Yeah, and speaking of marginalized communities, it does appear that the pact did not address the needs of the poorer countries. I mean, they were left frustrated at the pact, which they said did not address their concerns about loss and damage. I mean, this refers to the destruction caused by extreme weather, which has now been hitting vulnerable countries and communities far harder and more frequently than had been predicted.
Exactly. I think also, climate change has always been framed as an ecological issue, not really a social justice issue. Hence, a lot of the marginalized community voices have been left outside. But I think there now has been a shift. I've seen when I was at COP where there were a representative from the World Health Organization that were putting forward the stats on how people are being affected. And I think the more we can really shift that narrative into looking at climate change as an environmental issue and look at it as a social justice issue where human beings are at the center. And that's where we will start actually hearing stories on how people from Kailicha are being affected, people from Emalakeni is being affected, people from Kenya, who are struggling to grow their crops, because there hasn't been rain. People in Kailicha who don't have access to clean water, And I know I'm currently like in Joburg, there are some communities who don't have water, even though it's a maintenance issue, but it does link to climate change, because if we had enough rains, we wouldn't be sitting where we are. So I think it's time that we really make this issue a mainstream issue and really look at it at an intersectional where we are looking at health, we are looking at the economy, we are looking at how actually like a human being is being affected. Yeah.
Do you not think that it's now time to impose, more stricter and harsher punitive measures on those countries which fail to abide by the pledges on emission cuts made at this COP26 summit?
No, it's something that was put down in the agenda at COP26, to really make those rich countries, especially the big emitters like China, to pay, for the emissions. But there hasn't been any solution. It's something that would be really incredible, especially for the countries that have been badly affected. Because if you look at a lot of the global south countries, they don't emit a lot of emissions, yet they are the ones that are feeling the brunt of climate change. Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that Africa faces then in realizing some of the dictates of these agreements?
I think the biggest challenge is really for me, it's separating the politics to the technicalities. Because, we are seeing how the government is really clinging to the fossil fuels, but also how the global citizen is going against that and saying, this is actually harming lives. And I think the more we can have the civil societies, the grassroots movements, and the government speaking to each other and really finding commonalities to solve this issue, I think that could really be a way forward, because I think all of us, we do want to oversee, this climate emergency, but we don't really have spaces where we can all come together and share our solutions, our innovations, because there are people out there, that have come up with great solutions and innovations, but there are not enough platforms for them to speak to our government and to present, those projects. yeah.
No, Xoli, I want us to discuss in greater detail the current climate finance which is provided to countries to help them invest in green technology and other emissions cutting efforts and to adapt to the impacts of the climate crisis, and which is already falling short of promises. So is this not becoming an exercise in futility? I mean, in as much as we're taking 2 steps forward and taking 10 steps back?
I mean, it was a great outcome. Again, that was a great outcome of COP, where we got like 18 billion, to help this transition into renewable energy. But I think as South Africans, we know that accountability is one of the issues that we lack on. Mm-hmm. And there also hasn't been enough transparency of how that money is going to be used. I mean, we've heard that they're going to put together a body of people that would actually plan and discuss how that money could be used. But again, the grassroots movement have been really calling to leaders and saying, like, please don't leave us behind, because we are the ones that have been in the forefront of this movement and really have the solutions. And we are worried. I know there's been a big worry. I mean, whoever I speak to about the finance, they always say, they're saying there's been, with the COVID finance, there was a big looting, and we are hoping and crossing fingers that it's not going to be the same issue, 5 months down the line, where people are going to question what happened to that money, and there's not going to be any accountability. But I know that there are really big intergovernment organizations that are watching the government and holding them accountable and saying, please be transparent, bring us in, because we know we have the solution, but also whatever the transition is going to be, let it be centered around human beings, because that is very important.
All right, Xoli Fuyani, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.